Hey everybody, welcome back to JD Does Dev. I'm JD, and in this video we're going to take our last video a little bit further and customize our Drupal site. So let's get started. In this section we're going to go into a little bit more of what we can do with Docksal. And to do that we're going to make our Drupal project from the last section our own. The last section we installed the Drupal site using a boilerplate composer-based template. But what if we want to make changes to some of our installation settings? That's what we're going to be doing now. So let's start off by making some adjustments within our docksal.env file. So let's switch over to our editor. And if you've been following along, this is the same project that we've been using where we spun up our Drupal site. So everything should be the same here. Now let's open up our docksal.env file. Now this file contains the environment variables for Docksal. These are variables that are outside of the project, and they're variables that the project looks for when starting up in order to run the correct settings, build the right services, and for other reasons. We're going to start by changing our stack to match a production environment. So we've got this open, and here are the default settings. Docksal stack default, root web, MySQL port mapping, Xdebug enabled, and composer memory limit. We're going to make a couple changes now. Let's say we're using Pantheon for hosting. In order to mimic the Pantheon production environment, we can change our stack. So we're going to do that by changing the default stack to Pantheon and saving the file. I'll do that right here. Pantheon, and save it. Now, that doesn't do anything to our project just yet. So what we need to do now is run a command fin up. So I'm going to open up my terminal here and clear it. And run fin up. This may take a few seconds, so I'm going to pause and I'll come back after it's done. Okay, we've finished with our fin up, and it took us about a minute and 16 seconds. Not too bad. And scrolling back, you can see a few things happened here. We pulled the images down that we needed, which is where all of these pull completes are for. And we started a couple of new containers. You can see we recreated, which means restarted, Projects DB and Projects Web. Those were already in existence, but we've added these three: Solar, Redis, and Varnish. These are all services that are available on a Pantheon environment. So we want our environment to mimic that as close as possible, so we add in these services. Now we have these containers specific to that. This gives us access to these services locally to mimic settings that we may have on our production server, which is great. Now let's make a few more edits. So we go back to our docksal.env file, and the first thing we're going to do is enable Xdebug. So we change that to Xdebug enabled 1. We're also going to change our domain, because the current domain is pretty long, hard to type out. So let's make it something simpler. And let's do that by adding in virtual host equals my custom site.docksal. Now we're going to save this file, and we're going to go back to our terminal. Clear this. And we're going to run fin up again. Now fin up is a command that just tells Docksal that we want to update our services. And what it does, it just recreates what needs to be recreated, anything that's changed, but it doesn't delete anything. It's not the same as stopping the system and restarting it. It is rebuilding the existing services and restarting only the ones that are needed. So let's run fin up and see what happens. So the DB is already up to date. Redis was up to date. And these four, with the changes we made, most likely because of the domain that we changed, have all been recreated. And finally, down here at the bottom, you can see that our new project URL is mycustomsite.docksal. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing to notice here is that if we try to reload with the previous domain, we're going to get this nice little image saying project missing. But instead, if we paste in our new one, mycustomsite.docksal, then it loads right up just as before. Pretty simple change to update our local URL. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to make some changes to the configuration of our project. We can update the domain, we can add Xdebug, we can do quite a few things with just a couple lines of code. This is one of the advantages of using something like Docksal. Instead of having to rummage around and make several updates to get one change, we can do it in one place and it works just fine. Up next, we're going to get into a little bit more customization. Alright, in this section we're going to get into a little bit more customization of our Docksal project. So as a hypothetical, let's say that we want to change the site name on installation. We could do this by editing our Docksal commands init site file. So let's open that up and see where we might do that. Right here, you can see Docksal training Drupal 8 site. So we could definitely just change that, but then every project that we use would have to have a change in this file. So instead, we can add an environment variable to our docksal.env file and alter the init site file once. So let's try it. We've already got init site open, so let's open up our docksal env. We're going to add this line down here at the bottom. That is site name equals, this is a new name. We're going to save that, and then we're going to go back to init site. Now, instead of keeping site name here, we're going to use a bash variable. So let's clear this out. Make sure we're using double quotes and change this to site name. All right, now let's save it. I'm going to open up my terminal again, and we're going to stop the project because I'm going to be running Finite. And then we're going to run Finite again to see what happens. Since this takes a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and pause, and I'll see you back in a few seconds. Alright, well, it finished going through the update, and Finite did the Drupal installation, but we got an error here. Site name field is required. So what went wrong? Well, if you remember a little while back, I mentioned that environmental variables need to be sent over in docksal.yaml file. And since we added this environmental variable here for it to look for, and we added it in here, we need to tell Docksal that it exists. So to do that, we need to edit our docksal.yaml file. You open that up. So looking in here, you can see that there's not much to it, just a services, CLI, environment, and composer memory limit. Now these are added in so that Composer doesn't give us issues when we try to run it in the container. It doesn't define any services by itself. These are defined in the Docksal stacks. Remember looking back at those? But in the processing order, Docksal looks for this file and uses it to alter the default behavior or the current CLI service. Right now we're passing in that variable, this composer memory limit. Now to get access to our new site name, we need to tell Docksal to pass the site name variable as well. So we're going to just add in one more thing here. Site name. Now, this indentation needs to match the same indentation as Composer memory limit. YAML files are strict about that. If it were back a couple, for example, here, we'd get errors because it would see this the same level as these two, so it wouldn't work. The indentation needs to be present. So we have this site name. Site name is defined here. We're telling Docksal to pass this variable into the CLI container. I'm going to save it, and we'll go ahead and run Finite again. Since it's going to take a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and pause it, and I'll be back in a few seconds. So as you can see, it went through. No errors here. So let's take a look at the browser and see if the name changed. So here we are with our original one, Docksal Training Drupal 8 site, and I'm going to refresh it so we can take a look to see the changes. And here it is. This is a new name. This is a site that we were looking for. This is the name we wanted to see, and everything seems to be working great. Now in the next section, we're going to explore some of the more advanced customizations that we can do. We're going to add some custom labels, change our domain names further, and we're even going to create some of our own services to customize our own projects. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this one. I'm JD. This is JD Does Dev. I hope you learned something. I sure had a good time putting this together. And if you don't mind, go ahead and click that like and subscribe button down below and leave a comment if there's anything you think I left out or that you'd like me to cover in the future. See you on the next one.